Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you are, welcome to our next session of Massive Product Interviews. In our studio today, we have Ric Smith. He is the Chief Product and Technology Officer at SentinelOne. SentinelOne is a leading provider of security solutions of endpoint, cloud, and identity environments. As for me, I'm your host, Mustafa Kapadia. I help CPOs figure out how their teams can use AI to improve their efficiency and effectiveness. Ric, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Let's just jump in, if you don't mind. You briefly talked about how you have embedded AI in every aspect of your product, and you've gone all in. Can you just share with us how you're using AI to improve your current product line? What are the new capabilities or features you're trying to build or have already published?
Well, we've been doing AI and machine learning for almost 11 years. That was actually the premise of the company. So our endpoint offering, which was the first thing that we offered, actually did
Yeah.
something pretty novel and unique,
Hmm.
which was embed decision trees effectively on the endpoint. And that is now transitioning to small language models. In more relevant terms, in terms of, what everybody's excited about in the modern day, in terms of large language models, we use them within our AI SIEM offering.
Ah,
And there's a couple different ways that that actually is put in play. So first is
right.
looking at productivity of analysts. So you can think of security teams as being under a deluge of alerts that
Yes.
they need to triage consistently. So it's an assistant that's embedded within the platform that helps them summarize, search, deal with auto investigation and closure, and even go through automation of those tasks, which
Nice.
ultimately makes companies a lot safer because they can get to the bottom of that alert backlog a whole lot quicker. And then secondarily, it's starting to move towards looking at detection across lots of
Ah,
different forms of telemetry. But that in a nutshell is, kind of how we've put into play across our platform today.
very nice. And so, there's always this question. So first of all, it's great because I think just talking to other CPOs, you seem to be much ahead of the curve in just not just the adoption of large language models, but also getting it out in the marketplace. But there's always this $1 million question, right? So if you put AI into your product, are you actually getting something back? Is there a return on investment? Are you able to charge more for it, or are customers willing to pay more, or are you thinking of it more as a retention strategy?
It's actually coming down the pipe in two ways. So right now it's available as an additional SKU.
Mhm.
It is actually our fastest growing module in terms of
Oh wow,
attach rates of all time. So obviously it's only been out since May. So it's actually wild to see it catch fire like this.
that's awesome.
Um, a lot of folks actually have a hard time understanding how they would even engage with our platform without it because it helps them
Mm,
be so efficient. If you ever visit us at Black Hat or RSA, you'll actually see this event that we hold called, I believe it's now mortal versus machine versus man versus machine, just so that we can make sure
yeah.
that we're using the right vernacular around that. But it basically takes a audience member and pits them against some of our best threat hunters. And the
Oh
threat
wow,
hunters use the native capabilities of the platform, while the audience member gets to use Purple AI, our AI affordances within the platform. And we have yet to see one of our experts beat the assisted user, which is
wow.
phenomenal. So it's a lot of fun to watch, and our customers see the same kind of results.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, it's definitely shipping pretty quickly. I think we've benefited from a lot of cost advancements. It's definitely
Mm,
from a COGS burden, we've seen it be far less than what we assumed. So there are certain aspects of it that I think that we're going to start to push into the platform as just, normal features to help with the latter part that you spoke of, which is retention or even just
nice,
differentiation of the core
nice.
offering. And the more advanced stuff will remain a separate SKU.
Yeah. For these separate SKUs, is the value that you're trying to, is the value that your product is selling is really about productivity? Or how is it, what is it that the customers are buying when
It,
when you're charging them extra?
it's the double E. So it's efficacy and efficiency. So
Got
when
it.
it comes to security, everybody is basically rated on your efficacy rates. Can you
Got it.
detect certain things in your environment? So it's definitely helping us improve that, but it also helps with efficiency of analysts.
Yeah.
So finding cybersecurity folks is actually pretty difficult and it's pretty costly.
Yeah.
So you've got compressed budgets for these cybersecurity teams, CFO putting a lot of pressure on them in terms of cost cutting. And if you have this AI affordance, all of a sudden your team gets a whole lot more efficient and you can
Mm,
cover a lot more ground, even though the cost in and of itself is fairly compressed within your budgetary environment.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's great. So the value really is the cost play and the productivity, and when you get to the double E as the quality piece, right? And that's curious. So I'm curious if you go back 6 months or a year from now, how do you choose which ones or which areas to figure out where to invest AI in, right? Because a lot of CPOs have problems in saying that there's so many opportunities. And again, evaluating the opportunities as to just like what you said is a retention strategy, it's a revenue growth strategy. How did you end up figuring out where to invest and where not to invest?
Well, I think there's a couple dimensions of it that I evaluated. So one was the capability of the team. So large language models in general is kind of a new thing for people
Yes,
to grok and understand. So you want to make sure that you've pick a set of use cases that they're going to be able to achieve within a given time frame. Because obviously,
right.
like it's not an infinite continuum. We've got to make money at some point. And the other side of that is what is the easiest way to articulate value to your market? And so when we looked at introducing Purple AI, the dominant thing happening within cyber was budgetary compression.
Got it.
Every CISO that I would talk to would say, like, Rick, how I need two things: demonstrate how I'm getting value out of it because my CFO is asking me every day, and help me save money. And
Got it.
so that was definitely the catalyst for why we chose it. But it was also calibrating the team. And so as we've seen, like as we've gotten further and further along in our journey of adopting large language models, we are growingly getting into more complicated use cases.
Nice. I like the Venn diagram, right? So it's more about the ability of the team and exactly what the market wants. Sometimes understanding what the market wants, especially in this scenario, might be easier because of the two values that you talked about. But I'm curious, how did you actually end up with assessing the ability of your team? And I'm assuming that you actually had to do something to actually bring them up to speed too, no?
We did. So in that time frame, we had a team that was very adept at machine learning, less, what's categorized as generative AI and large language models. So one was, just taking the existing team and like getting them to buy into it and start
Yeah.
playing with these things to get an understanding of it. We obviously augmented that with hiring some new leadership and whatnot to help accelerate that growth path.
Hmm.
But the way LLMs work today, don't need the kind of raw data science background to be
No.
productive with them, which is one of the things that's so amazing about them. It's
Yes.
more just kind of understanding how they work, how they tick, and then you can start playing with how you can apply them to different use cases.
Yeah.
It was more getting the team wrapped around that than anything.
Nice. Did you find resistance to using large language models, either from your team or your external stakeholders, or even from your customers for that matter?
I'm in tech. I think they were all elated. They were like, how do I get this new toy and play with it as soon as possible? So
Nice.
it was pretty. And then the CEO was super motivated. I'm a technologist, so I
Of
was like
course.
ready to go.
Yeah. It's great. And you know what? That's one of the unique natures of where you are. All right, let's pivot a little bit. So you talked about the double E, right? I'm sure a double E, when you think about it, especially when you start using AI, it's the issues of trust, transparency, and security keep coming up, right? So I'm curious how you were able to answer those questions or how were you able to address those challenges?
So we have a concept of show your work with everything that we introduce. So no matter what action Purple AI takes, the end user can go in and look and see exactly the reasoning why these steps were taken. So everything's
Got it.
auditable. So that's the first like element of trust that we put into play. Second one is that we don't specifically cause it to automate anything. So you have to
Hmm,
opt into that process. So you can set it to fully automate, or you can back away from it and have a human in the middle to deal with evaluation so you gain trust around it. But end user gets complete control of how they deal with that.
nice. Nice. And then what about security itself? Because a lot of people are afraid of sharing information with large language models, or how have you been able to, especially coming from a security company, no?
And so with the way that we handle vectorization and tokenization, we don't pass any customer information to a large language model.
Okay.
So for them, that's completely anonymous. And then more recently, we started playing with smaller language models that are more experts in certain areas that we self
Hmm.
host. And
So
that
do you
allows
oh,
us to
okay, and
actually manage some more sensitive information in those environments.
yes. So you do actually do self-host because there is a new trend coming on in which more and more people are using small language models, and they are self-hosting, right? And then you can actually have all the security parameters,
Yeah,
that you talked about.
and that kind we're actually trying to heavily shift to doing all hosting. When we think that's
Interesting.
possible with the latest release of Llama, we definitely leverage Bedrock currently. We're starting to look at GCP. We're trying to be very agnostic in terms of our usage
Mhm.
around these platforms,
Yeah.
mainly because you have to treat it like the same cost structure that you deal with your cloud vendors. So,
Yeah.
if you go all in with AWS or all in with GCP, cost structure and leverage to manage those cost structures can be a little bit
Becomes easy.
difficult.
Yeah.
So you should have that latitude. Plus, the performance of these things is changing so variably. I mean, we started, with OpenAI in the early days when that was actually productive for us and conducive to our customer base. Quickly shifted away from that to Anthropic as they improved in terms of performance and cost structure. Like, who knows where we'll land in the end? These things are moving pretty fast.
Okay. Well, it is very expensive when you build even on top of both OpenAI or Anthropic, right? So I think Meta's large language model is by far it's looking more and more like, especially when I talk to people there who are definitely heavily invested in it. It seems the way to contain costs and still get the quality that you get from large language models, right?
Absolutely. Particularly when you're dealing with a strict domain like ours.
Yeah. I'm assuming you trained your own models, or do you just use it fresh out of the box?
A lot of it can be done with a RAG architecture around it.
Yeah.
So you don't have to deal with any kind of fine tuning or training around it. I think some of the more advanced use cases that we're looking at definitely require more training.
And that's a hard balance, right? If you train too much, it becomes very static or it loses the flexibility, so to speak. As you were building these products, I'm curious, what are the challenges that you had? I mean, I know we talked about the cost, right? And that's a big one because it is very expensive to use these models. Any other challenges that you had to face or you had to overcome?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is quality assurance because it's pretty like you have a pretty infinite space in terms
Yeah.
of understanding what the response characteristics are of these things. So you have to have a really, really good validation process that reaches all the way in the product so that the end user can also validate what they're seeing because you're not going to
Yeah.
catch everything.
No.
And fortunately, if you have a large enough customer base and they're doing enough validation out there in terms of, this was accurate,
Yeah.
this was not accurate, quality improves pretty quickly.
I do like your design principle in which you actually are using the customer as part of your validation, because that goes back to your trust and transparency comment earlier as well, right? And so it's throughout the entire process.
For sure.
And by design, which is even better. Any other tricks that you use for validation? Because even what the customer gets is also a curated list, I'm assuming. What else have you guys done? Because the quality piece is also a challenge, right? It is not, with large language models, you never know what answer you're going to get. Doesn't matter how many times you ask the same question.
Uh, yeah, they're not discrete in that manner. So
Yeah.
I think there's two perspectives that I would add to it. So one was the initial development. So these things were developed with customers, and I think a lot of product teams kind of lose sight of that, like
Yeah.
doing co-development with customers. So we had I believe it was about 50 customers that we worked with in the initial development process, and they helped us fine tune it. We also had
Perfect.
the user experience team in there looking at the interactions with it, both from a general UX perspective and from a usability perspective. And
Right.
that really made the product what it is today. And if you look at the security related AI agents out there, this is one of the few that's actually actively in production and in use. And I totally think that, that brass tacks product motion was the thing that got it there above and beyond
Mm,
anything. So that gets you to the GA quality. And then the
right.
long running quality aspect of it is we have our own curation, like you assumed. We are looking at all of the generated content from it constantly. From that, we actually can walk back and see what questions were asked of it, why these things happened. And then from that, we have a whole training set that we can map.
Perfect.
and solidify that these are valid things. Plus, you also have to understand that we have the system to begin with, so we know generally what people are asking it, and we can
Mm,
look at it from that perspective as well in
yeah,
terms of where the limits should
yeah.
be.
Yeah, you do have some inherent advantages, but it's also just from what you're talking about, I'm sure it was a very challenging process that you're still
Oh
trying to
yeah,
figure out. No.
it's not done.
Yeah,
There's still more to come.
I know. I can't wait, which actually kind of brings me to our last question. So I love the journey that you've gone through, right? Especially not just making sure you pick the right areas to invest in. You co-invested with your users. You built a product that they're willing to pay extra for, as well as using some of it for retention. Any lessons learned or anything else that you would like to share or things that you said, "Oh, I had done that earlier," that you can share with other CPOs who are kind of on the same journey? Not in the security field, but just in general.
I mean, I think the biggest lesson that I learned in the whole thing was less about AI and
Hmm,
more about user experience. And
okay.
so I think that when you're dealing with a really technical domain, folks forget that this is really about making it easy for an end user and even
Yeah.
delightful to use and interact with. And really investing in our UX team was the other side of this equation
Mm,
and making it a viable product.
yeah,
And so that actually helped us identify both in terms of what we intuited and then what we actually understood from our customers, how they would actually put this thing into use and how it was best
yeah,
integrated with the platform versus what you could consistently see as a co-pilot alongside
yeah,
these kind of platforms
yeah.
that assists you in your journey in the platform, but it doesn't really change your experience of the platform directly. And so that was probably the biggest learning that I had from the whole
Yeah.
experience. And
So
we
you
were
actually end up redesigning the entire experience around
we did
or around that whole detection process, so to speak, right?
all of the workflows around all of the analyst workflows were redefined around it. And then,
Yeah,
yes, in terms of the detection, in terms of helping a end user understand what was detected, how it was detected, and ultimately how it maps to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, that fundamentally shifted based off of that analysis. But
yeah.
that was a huge help in us producing a product that customers actually liked. It was useful to them, gave them value, and hopefully gave them a couple shekels back.
You know what? I love your answer because sometimes we forget that even though it's a new technology, the fundamentals still remain the same. Like, go and focus and solve a customer problem, make it easier for them to solve it, make it a delightful experience. And then, of course, use technology around it. This is fantastic, Rick. This has been fantastic. This has been a great conversation. I would love to have you back and just see where you are, maybe even 6 months or a year from now, because I'm tons of progress.
I really appreciate the time and appreciate the invite back. Love to do it again.